Back then, I was just a waiter at a small diner in a town that hardly anyone remembered the name of. No one thought I could make something of myself, not even me, yet today, the sauce passed down from my grandmother sits on the shelves of hundreds of supermarkets across America. If you've ever believed that small things can create miracles, then this story is for you. Before we begin, if you love heartwarming, healing, and inspiring stories like this, don't forget to follow the Gentleheart Stories channel, because who knows? One day, you might find a piece of your own dream in the stories we tell. I vividly remember the first night I worked my shift. The diner, with its old sign flickering with neon lights, quietly sat by Highway 55. Inside, the smell of old frying oil mixed with the scent of weak coffee and the clinking of cutlery on ceramic plates. I took the night shift, not because I liked it, but simply because it was the only job that would accept an Asian student with no degree and no experience. The night shift was a special time. Unlike the daytime, where noise and haste overshadow everything, the night shift was slower, quieter, and sometimes, lonelier. I met all kinds of people: tired truck drivers stopping by, students working late on projects, heartbroken individuals seeking refuge, and sometimes, wanderers who only wanted a hot drink and a bit of human company. But no matter who they were, I learned one thing: here, no one truly cared about anyone else's dreams. Everyone was too busy struggling with their own. One time, I tried to share with a regular customer, an older man who always sat at the corner table, that I dreamed of someday opening a small restaurant, using my grandmother's secret recipe. He laughed, nodded, and then continued eating his fries. There was no encouragement. No look of respect. Just a polite response. At that moment, I understood that, here, dreams were a luxury, and sometimes, just speaking them out loud made you feel foolish. Every night, I went to work with tired legs and folded dreams in my heart. I wore the apron, took orders, wiped down tables, cleaned dishes, and poured coffee. Often, I felt like a silent shadow in a real-world life. Customers ordered without looking me in the eye. The owner only remembered my name when he needed someone to clean the restrooms. I didn't blame them. Because I understood, no one knew there was another part of me, a part one kept guarded, like a small flame that hadn't yet burned bright. I chose silence. And I worked. Because I believed that one day, if the opportunity came, that flame wouldn't be extinguished by anyone. I was born in America, but in my heart, I never truly felt like I belonged here. At school, I was the kid who ate rice with soy sauce instead of a sandwich. At the diner, I was the Asian waiter that customers often asked, "Where are you from?" And even when I replied, "From here, Springfield," they'd ask again, "No, I mean, where are you really from?" But at home, I was always myself, the granddaughter of my grandmother, the child of my mother, and the unofficial heir to an invaluable legacy, the family sauce recipe. My grandmother often told me that the sauce wasn't just a seasoning, it was a history. It was love. It was a way to preserve a part of one's heritage in a strange world. We lived in an old apartment on the third floor, the walls peeling, the wooden floor creaking every time someone walked. But in that small kitchen, my grandmother still cooked regularly as if she were in her own restaurant. On the wall, she hung a photo of my great-grandfather, who had run a small diner back in our homeland, as if to remind us that tradition could never fade, no matter where we lived. Every morning, when sunlight filtered through the dusty window, my grandmother would be standing by the stove, wooden spoon in hand, muttering the recipe. I still remember the excitement I felt the first time she let me stir the sauce pot. I spilled it. She didn't scold me. She only said, "When you truly understand the flavor of family, your hand won't shake anymore." My mother was more practical. She always told me that education was the only way to escape this uncertain life. But my grandmother was different. She saw in me a cook. Not the best cook, but the only one who could understand what each drop of sauce meant. I'm not sure when it happened, but my grandmother's small kitchen became the place where I felt safest. No need for explanations, no need to prove anything, just listening to the bubbling sound of the sauce, and I knew where I belonged. My dream, though still vague, had begun in moments like those. My life was divided into two clear parts. During the day, I would be in the small kitchen with my grandmother, learning how to cook dishes never lacking the secret family spices, while at night, I became a tired waiter, listening to the whispers of unsatisfied customers and sometimes receiving unreasonable complaints. Every morning, my grandmother would wake up early. Even though she was in her 70s, she never stopped working. I loved the feeling of standing by her in the small kitchen, listening to her explain the spices, the precision of each step in the family recipe. "You have to taste it bit by bit," she would often say. "You can't rush, because cooking is not a race." She taught me not just the recipes, but also patience, attention to detail, and love in every dish. Although we lived in a small apartment, every meal she cooked carried the soul of a generation that had passed. She never rushed, never lacked patience. That was how she taught me to slow down and enjoy every moment. At night, I became a different person. I wore the apron, rolled up my sleeves, and did simple tasks, serving food to customers, cleaning tables, wiping dishes, always keeping a smile on my face, even though inside I might be tired. Complaints, grumbles, those were things I had gotten used to, but each time, they left me feeling a little empty. I couldn't please everyone all the time, and that sometimes made me feel like a failure. One of my most memorable moments was one cold winter night when a customer ordered a burger and complained that the bread wasn't crispy enough, the fries were too soft. I tried to explain that sometimes it was because the oil was too hot, but the customer snapped. "This isn't how I want to be served." At that moment, I could only force a smile and pour more coffee. My heart was full of frustration, but I knew I couldn't let it show. I was just a waiter. And that was my job, but every night, when my shift ended, I would pull out the old notebook my grandmother had taught me to keep, review the recipes, and write down a few new things. Although I couldn't share it with anyone, in my heart, those small pieces made the dream bigger. No matter how busy the work was, no matter how unsatisfied the customers were, I still believed that one day, this family recipe would be worth more than anything I was doing. The days were for learning from my grandmother. The nights were for learning patience with life, with those who didn't understand what I was doing. But inside me, there was always a small flame, the flame from the recipes my grandmother had passed down, from the perseverance she had taught me. And I knew, one day, that flame would not only shine in her kitchen but would light up the whole world. That notebook was not just a book filled with recipes. It was a treasure, a legacy that my grandmother entrusted to me. Every time I flipped through its pages, I could feel the love and the expectations she had for me, the only grandchild who could continue the family's legacy. These recipes weren't written in ordinary handwriting, but in careful, elegant blue ink, almost like a promise between my grandmother and me. One evening, when the restaurant was empty, I took the notebook out of my coat pocket. Sitting in a quiet corner, I turned the pages slowly, mesmerized by my grandmother's recipes. These sauce recipes, the family dishes, even secrets only she knew. The feeling was special, Like I was holding the key to a world that no one else could unlock. The sauce recipe wasn't a fancy or expensive dish. It was simply a blend of humble ingredients with rich, deep flavors. I knew it might not immediately wow anyone, but I could feel that, if I could convey that flavor to others, it would work a kind of magic, but I didn't dare share the notebook with anyone. People wouldn't believe me. A humble Asian waiter, working the night shift, could I really have something so valuable? The blue ink in that notebook was a secret between me and my grandmother, between me and the past. That notebook wasn't just a family heirloom, it was a gift from the past that I had to protect. Late into the night, I kept the notebook close to me. Though I was just a waiter working to make a living, in my mind, I held something important. And I knew, one day, I would find a way to turn those recipes into something bigger. But until that day, I would remain silent, because I understood that sometimes, keeping a secret is the only way to protect a dream. Once, after serving a roasted chicken to a customer, I couldn't resist the urge to try something different. The restaurant was used to serving dishes from old recipes, nothing special. But something inside me urged me to do something new. I decided to secretly add a few drops of my grandmother's sauce to the roasted chicken. Just a little bit. I knew it would be a small experiment but one filled with hope. When the customers finished, I stood there, holding my breath, waiting for their reaction. I didn't say anything, just waited. A minute later, one of the regulars turned to me, his eyes lighting up. "You know," he said, "this is the best chicken I've ever had here. There's something special about it." I couldn't believe my ears. Just a few drops of sauce, such a small change, and yet it made such a big difference. At that moment, I just smiled awkwardly, not daring to admit it was my family's secret sauce. I didn't know how to respond. But inside, I felt a surge of happiness. It wasn't just a compliment. It was an acknowledgement that what I carried wasn't just a dish, it was a part of my family, a part of my past. After the customers left, I returned to my regular work. But this time, I didn't feel like just a waiter anymore. I felt like I had something special. Even though no one knew, even though no one understood, I knew I had done something that not everyone could do. I had experimented with my grandmother's recipe, and I saw that it could bring about wonderful changes. Although there were signs that my sauce could make a difference, I still didn't dare to speak up. I knew that, in this world, sometimes dreams and abilities could only exist in your mind. If I shared it with others, they would laugh at me. A waiter of Asian descent, with nothing but his job of serving food, could he really have a family cooking secret? I thought about this for many nights. Why couldn't I share my recipe? Why couldn't I make something bigger from what my grandmother taught me? But in a small restaurant like that, who would believe me? Who would see me as anything other than a silent waiter, just trying to get by? My heart was full of unanswered questions. But whenever I felt that way, I would pull out my grandmother's notebook, sit down, and continue dreaming about a day when I could make the world know my family's secret sauce. But that dream seemed far away, and I understood that, before it could become a reality, I would have to face many challenges, not just from others, but from within myself. If you feel that this story touches your heart, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next inspiring stories. At Gentleheart Stories, we share tales of kindness, change, and valuable life lessons. Be a part of this loving community and help us spread positive messages. That night, the rain came pouring down. And the damp air made everything feel quieter than usual. My little restaurant was quieter too, with just a few regular customers coming in to eat like every other night. I still remember clearly, I was standing by the small bar, staring at a pile of unwashed dishes, feeling disheartened. The middle-aged woman was still ordering the roasted chicken, a familiar dish we always served. But tonight, I decided to try something different. A little bit of my grandmother's family sauce, I added it to the dish without telling anyone. For the first time, I felt a bit nervous doing this. Though it was just a few drops, I had waited for this moment for so long. Every time my grandmother spoke about her sauce recipe, I felt a strong belief inside me that it could change everything. But still, running a restaurant is always full of challenges. Would the customer notice the difference? Would she like it? Or had I done something foolish? When the dish was served, I stood there, watching each of the customers' movements. Though anxiety filled my mind, I reminded myself to stay calm. That night, I couldn't have imagined that such a simple action would change everything in my life. A compliment could be the beginning of a major turning point, and all I had to do was believe I was doing the right thing. After finishing her meal, the woman called me over to her table. I could sense her gaze, not just curiosity but a hint of surprise. She looked at me and asked, "Is there something different about this dish today?" My whole body trembled. That simple question made my heart race. Did she notice the difference? And if she did, could I explain it to her? But instead of avoiding the question or making up an excuse, I chose to be honest. I told her that I had tried adding a bit of my grandmother's family sauce to the dish. I talked about my family, the notebook my grandmother left me, and the cooking traditions I had always preserved. I didn't hide anything or try to cover up the truth. It was the first time I felt proud of what I was doing. Even though no one else believed me, today, I wasn't going to back down. The woman listened quietly as I spoke, but the atmosphere seemed lighter. Suddenly, she laughed, and in that laugh, I saw empathy, a kind of understanding I didn't expect. She didn't just listen to me, she saw something special in the way I shared my story. It wasn't mockery, it was respect. After laughing, she handed me a business card. I looked at it and was shocked. On the card was her name, the director of a major local food chain. I couldn't believe my eyes. A food director. And she was the one who had tasted my dish and given me her business card. At that moment, my worries and fears disappeared. I no longer felt like just an anonymous waiter. I felt like I had just encountered an opportunity, one I couldn't let slip away. The woman looked at me with sincere eyes and said, "If your sauce can really bring this flavor, I think you should try doing something with it." Honestly, I couldn't describe my emotions at that moment. I just stood there, feeling my heart beat faster, sweat starting to form, but inside, I was filled with hope. I had once dreamed that one day, someone would recognize the value of the traditional dishes I had preserved all these years. But I never thought that person would be a food director. Life can be so extraordinary. And in that moment, I knew I had just encountered the first turning point in this long journey. When she said those words, I could hardly believe my ears. She told me to bottle the sauce and bring her a sample. What did that mean? Did she really want to help me? Or was she just joking? But her eyes held no hint of jest, only expectation and respect. She no longer saw me as just a waiter but as someone who could create something truly different. We're always looking for special products. Foods with soul, with history. And I believe you can bring that, she said. Those words were like a powerful push to my mind. I felt like I was being given new strength, like a new fire was igniting within me. She wasn't just the only one who complimented my sauce. She saw in it a potential I had never dared to imagine. To be trusted by a food chain director was a huge turning point for me. It wasn't just a compliment, it was an opportunity. An opportunity to take my family's secret recipe to the world. When I got home, I told my mother and grandmother about what had just happened. She sat in silence for a long time, her eyes a little misty. She didn't say anything right away, just silently wiped her eyes and said, "If you do this, keep the soul of the dish in every drop." Her words were a reminder of the value of the family recipe. She had lived with this dish her whole life, and now, she was entrusting me with the responsibility to preserve that tradition. To her, the sauce was not just a condiment, it was the connection between generations, the flavor of love and memories. She wanted me to bring that flavor to the world but never forget the core values. I felt the responsibility in every word she spoke. It was both sacred and heavy. But I knew this was my opportunity, and I had to do something to make sure I wouldn't disappoint her. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept spinning. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of the customer appeared with her words, "Bring me a sample of the sauce." I felt like I was standing at a major crossroads in my life. This wasn't just a turning point in my career, it was a turning point in myself. A part of me was still scared, but most of me was filled with hope. This might be the first time someone truly believed in me, in what I do, and that's exactly what I needed. To believe in myself. Even if I'm small, even if I'm lacking, I know that if I persevere and never give up, I can do something great. That dream is no longer far away. It's right in front of me. After receiving advice from the customer, I decided to start turning my dream into reality. However, the road ahead was not easy. I didn't have the money to invest in the product, so I borrowed money from family and friends. Every time I asked for money, I had to explain myself, sometimes feeling like I was asking for something out of reach. But they believed in me, they believed I could do it, and I didn't want to let them down. With the money I borrowed, I started buying ingredients, bottles, and looking for a small commercial kitchen where I could work freely. Everything was still in its early stages. I had no experience in business or large-scale production. But I had passion, and that was what kept me going when I felt exhausted. I began experimenting, making the first batches of sauce. Everything was still new and difficult, but I was determined not to give up. When borrowing money from loved ones, I felt a responsibility greater than myself, because it wasn't just about money but also their trust. They believed I wouldn't waste this opportunity. Yet, I still felt uncertain. Could I really do this? Would I fail? But there was no time for doubt anymore. I had to begin. The first batch of sauce I made was truly a disaster. When I placed it on the stove and waited for it to boil, I noticed a strange smell, not like the sauce my grandmother used to make. The smell made me feel like something was wrong. But I tried to stay calm, not wanting to ruin the process. I believed that just a little more, and everything would be fine. When I tasted it, I immediately realized that the flavor was nothing like I had imagined. It wasn't right, not like the taste my grandmother made for my grandfather. It was too spicy, too sweet in an unnatural way, and most of all, the scent made me uneasy. I couldn't believe my first batch of sauce had failed so miserably, but I couldn't stop. Even in failure, I knew every mistake was a lesson. I had failed, but that didn't mean I couldn't stand up and continue. I remembered my grandmother's words, "Cooking is not just about the recipe, but about patience and love for each dish." And I knew I would try again. When I perfected the recipe, I decided to send 10 sample bottles to local stores. I hoped at least one of them would like it and agree to sell my product. But the reality wasn't what I had hoped. The weeks passed with no feedback. It felt like I was standing in a crowd of silence, no one wanting to listen to what I was doing. Finally, after many days of waiting, a store responded. But what I received wasn't encouragement, it was a cold rejection: leaking bottles, product doesn't meet standards. Those words felt like a slap in the face. A part of me was deeply disappointed because I had poured so much effort into creating this product. But in that moment, I realized that failure was not the end, but a part of the journey. Looking back, I understood that failure was just the beginning of learning important lessons. It made me realize I needed to improve. And most of all, it taught me that not everyone will see value right away. But if I persist, one day someone will notice. In the days that followed, I really thought about giving up. Everything seemed to be going wrong. My product still hadn't reached customers, and the feedback I received was always rejections. I was exhausted from trying to do everything right and still failing. Part of me thought, should I just go back to waiting tables? At least that job provided a steady income and less headache, but when I thought of my dream, I couldn't go back. The dream of creating my grandmother's product and bringing it to others was the only thing that got me out of bed every morning. If I gave up now, I would never know how far I could go. I would always be just a waiter in a small restaurant. No, I couldn't give up. I would find a way. No matter how many more times I failed, whenever I felt discouraged, I would open my grandmother's notebook. In it, her blue ink handwriting was still clear, and each message was still intact. One of the lines I always remembered was, "Cooking is telling a story through flavors." These words were a reminder that every dish wasn't just a product to sell, but a story of love, family, and tradition. When I looked at that notebook, I felt I had a responsibility to tell my grandmother's story, to tell my family's story through each dish. I knew I couldn't give up. I had decided to keep going, no matter how many times I failed. Because I knew that if I persisted, one day, my story would be heard and loved by everyone. After every failure, I learned more. I began adjusting my sauce recipe. I reduced the amount of sugar so it wouldn't be too sweet, and added a bit of pepper, just like my grandmother used to make for my grandfather. Every adjustment made me feel like I was improving, though sometimes there were still batches that didn't turn out as expected. But I didn't give up. I felt I was getting closer to the perfect recipe my grandmother had passed down. I understood that cooking was a process, not just a moment. And it was the patience, the love in each dish, that would make the difference. Even if the recipe wasn't perfect at first, I knew I would keep refining it until it became great. My whole life had taught me that nothing is meaningless if you truly believe in what you do. If you're feeling that this story resonates with your heart, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next inspiring stories. At Gentleheart Stories, we share stories of kindness, change, and valuable life lessons. Join our loving community and help us spread positive messages. Finally, after countless failures and sending out products without any responses, I received an opportunity that I could hardly believe. A specialty food store in Chicago agreed to try selling 20 bottles of my sauce during Christmas. At first, I was doubtful and couldn't believe it was happening. Could this be a real opportunity? A part of me still worried that the product wouldn't be good enough, that it wouldn't be able to compete with products already on the market, but once I received the approval, I no longer hesitated. I immediately got to work. Each bottle was carefully packaged, and each jar was double-checked to ensure quality. Although it was only 20 bottles, to me, it wasn't just about the number of products. It was a chance to prove that I could accomplish what I had always dreamed of. I drove nearly 3 hours to deliver them. With every mile on the road, my heart beat faster. This was the first time I was sending my product out into the world, and I knew I couldn't let this opportunity slip by. When I walked into the store, carrying my bottles of sauce, I felt that I wasn't just bringing a product, I was offering a piece of myself, my family, and the loving stories my grandmother had taught me. It was the first time I truly felt that I was on the right path. After everything was prepared, I began the 3-hour journey to deliver the products. With every hour, every mile, I thought about what I had been through. I had faced so many failures and so many times thought about giving up. But now, I was driving toward a new opportunity, one that I had been waiting for a long time. When I arrived, I didn't just hand the products to the store employees, I personally arranged the bottles of sauce on the shelf. Partly because I wanted to make sure they were displayed nicely, and partly because I wanted to feel that I had done something meaningful. I stood there, looking at my bottles on the shelf. And the feeling was amazing. No one said anything, no one saw me standing there, but I knew I was doing something important. It wasn't just about delivering the products, it was a long journey, a confirmation that dreams are not just distant things, but concrete steps we must take. And I had done it. A week later, I received a call I had been hoping for. The store owner called to tell me that all 20 bottles of my sauce had sold out in just 3 days. Not only that, customers asked for more. I listened, unable to believe my ears. It was the first time in my life that I felt real recognition from people outside of my family and friends. It wasn't just a compliment, it was a true acknowledgement of the value of the product I had created. I felt an indescribable joy. Not because I sold products, but because I had done what I always dreamed of. That was what I needed to prove to myself that I could do it. Each bottle of sauce had become a part of life, a story told through taste, and now it was loved by people who had never known me. After this initial success, things seemed to change quickly. I received an invitation to participate in a local food fair to showcase my product. It was an opportunity one couldn't miss. Every vendor at the fair had special products, and I was just a beginner. But that didn't scare me, on the contrary, I felt like I was part of a bigger world, where food lovers could share their stories and ideas. As the fair day approached, I prepared everything carefully. I brought a display table filled with my sauce bottles, hoping that someone would stop and try them. But I knew that only perseverance and passion would make me stand out among all the other products. When the fair day arrived, I didn't just bring products, I brought a story about family, about the nights my grandmother cooked, and about the love I had for this sauce. I wasn't expecting anything but a chance to express my passion. At the fair, I met an investor. He had many years of experience in the food industry, and after tasting my product, he said something I would always remember: "Kid, this isn't just sauce, it's a story that can be sold." Those words gave me strength. Not only because he complimented my product, but because he saw what I always believed: each bottle of my sauce wasn't just a condiment, but a part of a story about family, love, and perseverance. Those words made me feel like I had truly done something special. I was no longer just a waitress, I was a storyteller through food, and my story was being heard. That's why I couldn't give up, because I wasn't just selling a product, I was selling a piece of my soul. That night, when I got home, I sat down and thought about everything that had happened. For the first time, I clearly felt that the future was no longer a vague thing. It had become clear, and I could see every step, every jar of sauce I would bring to the world. Every time I sold a bottle, every time I met a new customer, was a firmer step on the path I had chosen. I realized that success doesn't come overnight, but through small steps, through every trial and failure. And when you don't give up, when you continue to walk even when the road is tough, eventually, you will see the light. That's what I feel now, and it's something I will never give up on. The first day I received the investment capital was the moment I felt a huge change in my life. Finally, I could dream of something bigger, no longer just small-scale production in the kitchen. I was no longer just a waitress in a small restaurant, I was the head of a project, a real brand. With that capital, I was able to rent a small workshop in the suburbs, a humble place but enough to start mass production. It wasn't a large factory, but for me, it was the first step, the foundation on which I would build everything I had dreamed of. The early days in the workshop were unforgettable. Even though I didn't have many employees, I had to do everything: check ingredients, measure quantities, label, and package. Every step was a challenge, but it was through these challenges that I gained a deeper understanding of my work. I wasn't just making sauce, I was creating a story, a family legacy I wanted to share with everyone. I knew this path wouldn't be easy, but I was mentally prepared to move forward, never to turn back. When I thought of a name for my product, I didn't just want a simple name, but something that would be a tribute, a way to honor my beloved grandmother who taught me how to love and work with all my heart. I decided to name the product Grandma's Fire. Fire wasn't just the warmth of family, but also the passionate flame my grandmother passed on to me in every meal, every dish she cooked. I wanted everyone who held this bottle of sauce to feel the love and perseverance my grandmother instilled in me. I believe every dish tells its own story, and Grandma's Fire is my story, the connection between the past and the present. These bottles of sauce aren't just seasonings, they are part of the family, symbols of love, care, and dreams that never fade. The name Grandma's Fire is not just a product but a legacy, and I want everyone who tastes it to feel that flame in every flavor. When designing the label, I wanted to make sure it truly reflected what I wanted to convey, not just a dish, but a story, a family legacy. I decided to print the words, "Inspired by love, crafted by family." This wasn't just a slogan, but a promise to my grandmother and my family. It shows that every bottle of sauce is the result of hard work, love, and values I've always cherished. I want everyone to understand that Grandma's Fire is not a product of a big company, but a product of a family, a person brave enough to pursue their dream, no matter how difficult the road. I want everyone who holds this bottle in their hands to feel the love and connection I've poured into it. And every time they use it, they'll remember their own family, the people who helped them grow and succeed. After I officially launched the product on the market, miracles started happening. At first, only a few small local supermarkets accepted orders. I didn't expect much, but every order was a sign that my dreams weren't just fantasies. One supermarket after another added orders, and gradually, I started receiving orders from bigger stores. Then one day, I got a call from a major distribution system in the state. And I knew this was the most important turning point of my journey. Every order, every time my product was placed on the supermarket shelf, was an indescribable feeling. What I had dreamed of was no longer an illusion, it was reality. I could now share my product with thousands of people, from small customers to large retail systems. That feeling took me back to the early days in the small kitchen when I could only dream of seeing my product on supermarket shelves. A memorable day in my life, the day I signed a contract with Whole Foods, one of the largest food chains in the U.S. But sadly, on that very day, my grandmother passed away. She was the one who taught me everything, from the sauce recipe to the life values I've carried throughout this journey. Her death left me with an indescribable sense of loss, but I knew she had lived a full life, and she would always be with me, in every dish I made, in every decision I made. As I stood in front of her grave, I felt a huge responsibility. I promised her I would never dilute the soul of this sauce, would preserve the recipe and the love she gave me. No matter how much things changed, no matter how much my company grew, I would never forget that it was she who started it all. I will always keep her in my heart and in every bottle of sauce I bring to the world. The day I decided to quit my job at the restaurant was an important one. It was the turning point, the moment I officially stepped out of the shadow of being a waitress and into the world of being a business owner. It wasn't an easy decision because I knew I would face many challenges and difficulties. But I also knew that I couldn't continue living a life working for others. I needed to stand up and take control of my destiny. When I walked out of the restaurant for the first time as my own boss, I felt I had grown, that I was strong enough to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Those steps weren't just mine, they were the steps of all those who had supported me, believed in me, and loved me from the difficult early days. And now, I was ready to keep moving forward, carrying the values of family and my dreams, to build an empire from the simple, loving things. When I look back on my journey from the early days of being a waiter, I can't believe that now, Grandma's Fire is in over 300 supermarkets across the United States. It hasn't been an easy journey. From failures and challenges to sleepless nights, every step has been a test. But now, when I see my product on the supermarket shelf, I feel like I've accomplished something that I once only dreamed of. But when I look at those bottles of sauce on the shelf, I don't just see a brand, I see a story of family, love, and perseverance. Over 300 supermarkets may seem like a big number, but for me, it's still just the beginning. I truly believe this journey isn't over. This is just the beginning of greater things, of the next dreams I still hold. And I know that if I can make it this far, anyone can achieve their own big dreams, even though Grandma's Fire has become a national brand. I still keep the habit of cooking a small batch every week, just to remind myself of the early days. It's my way of keeping the original flavor from my grandmother, so I never forget the roots of everything. Every time I cook, I'm not just making sauce, I'm creating a story, I'm connecting the past with the present, and more importantly, I'm keeping the flame alive for a family legacy. Cooking a small batch is not just about following the recipe, it's about a deep connection with my grandmother. Every time I add a pinch of seasoning, every time I stir, I remember the lessons she taught me about seasoning with my heart, about the love she passed down to me. Even though the company has grown. And no matter who I become, I never want to forget those simple things. And that's why I keep making those small batches, as a way to keep that flame burning. One of the most important decisions of my life was when I opened a cooking scholarship in my grandmother's name, dedicated to children of immigrant families. I understand that the path I walked may not be an opportunity everyone has, but I also believe that anyone can change their destiny if given the chance. My grandmother always taught me, never forget where you started, and I want the generations to come to have the same opportunity one had. This scholarship doesn't just give young people the chance to learn the art of cooking, but it also helps them find their passion and, most importantly, creates opportunities to change their lives. With this scholarship, I want to inspire young people, those seeking a chance to change their lives. When you come from an immigrant family, you may not have all the opportunities others do, but you can create your own opportunities. And I want to be a part of that journey, so they can see that no matter where you start, with passion and perseverance, you can go very far. although the media calls me the waiter turned millionaire from sauce, I never see myself as a millionaire. I only see myself as a keeper of the flame. Keeping the flame isn't just about maintaining the passion in work, it's about holding on to family values, the values my grandmother taught me. It's nice to be called that by the media, but I know the truth is I couldn't have come this far alone. I have family, friends, and those who believed in me from the very start. And I always remember that, no matter how great my success, I am still just a keeper of the flame, holding on to the most precious parts of family and tradition, even if I achieve great success. I will never forget that everything began with simple things, from a small restaurant and a family recipe. And every time I think back to those early days, I feel like I'm a part of a larger story, a story that can inspire others. Every time I see a customer smile after tasting my sauce, I remember the first dinner when my grandmother taught me how to season with my heart. That's when I realized that cooking isn't just about the recipe, it's about the emotions, the connection you create through each dish. That feeling is hard to describe, but every time I see joy in a customer's eyes, I know I've succeeded in conveying love and passion through every flavor. When customers praise my sauce, I don't just feel proud of the product, I feel like my grandmother is still with me, continuing to pass down valuable lessons. It's those smiles that keep me going, never giving up. And I understand that, not only did she inspire me, but I can also inspire others, through the meals, through the flavors I create. If anyone asks me what the secret to my success is, I will smile and say, it's love. And a little bit of spicy pepper. It's a simple secret, but one full of meaning. Love is the foundation for everything. For creating dishes, products that are not only delicious but also full of heart and dedication. And a little spicy pepper adds the difference, adds flavor to life, to everything we do. Sometimes, it's those special spices that make everything perfect. For me, success isn't about the numbers, it's about the journey. It's a journey that starts with small steps, from a simple batch of sauce, and then every day, every week, I continue to add flavor to my life. And if I can do it, you can too. All you need is a little love, a little spicy pepper, and the perseverance to pursue your dreams. And that's my journey, from a waiter in a small restaurant to standing firm on my own feet with Grandma's fire. Every step, every failure, every success is a valuable lesson I've learned from my family, from my grandmother, and from myself. And I want you to remember that there is no easy road, but if you believe in yourself, stay persistent, and always carry good values in your heart, you can achieve anything you dream of. Finally, what I want to tell you is, never give up on your dreams, no matter how tough it gets. Because sometimes, a sudden turning point can change your whole life. And if my story can inspire you, help you find the strength to keep going, then I have truly succeeded. Thank you for following this story. If you feel inspired by it, don't forget to subscribe to the Gentleheart Stories channel so you don't miss out on other amazing stories. Keep going on your journey, and remember that every step you take is important.